Yeah, Monday mornings, OTB AM at 8:15. Thanks for joining us, as per usual. We're here until 10 o'clock on OTB AM, the sports breakfast show from Off the Ball. Anthony Moyles, good morning, how are things?
Morning, gents. How are we?
Keeping well. We've had a lot of tweets. I've had a lot of tweets. I'm sure you've had a lot of tweets as well from support from the Kingdom. Because I predicted, a bit like yourself, Tyrone, that to show up at the weekend, and well, either they didn't show up or Kerry did show up, but we're both getting a lot of messages, I think, Anthony.
Yeah, I got one or two, all right, Shane. Yeah, I didn't realise the Kerry lads got so worked up over a measly old quarterfinal, but the funny thing is, I didn't get many messages last week after I said it, so the kind of after the fact messages, which is interesting. So what that tells me is that I think if they were being honest with themselves, they were equally as worried coming into the game. And I think that's true, but I was getting messages. Yeah, I was getting messages from all over, from Kerry lads. I even got a message from a lad here in Dunshaughlin who says to me, "You bollock, Milesy." He said, "Me and Owen," that's his son, Owen O'Connor. This is a lad, Bell O'Connor, gas man. He says, "Me and Owen had money on Tyrone on your OTB advice. No chips on the way home tonight," he said. So wasn't a happy man, poor old Bell. But it's I think, like, if you actually analyse the form which I looked at, Kerry weren't showing anything coming into the game. Had beaten a Loud, who were a beaten Dockett, struggled over Cork. Mayo obviously handed it to them in Fitzgerald Stadium. And whereas Tyrone were showing that they were starting to come good, they were showing that bit of bite and that intensity that they've had over, especially the year when they won the All-Ireland. We're showing obviously some serious prowess and ability up front. And loads of energy, and they had absolutely it's just amazing to see that it completely flipped on its head. Like, they were just devoid of absolutely all of that, especially in the second half, but you could see loads of instances of it in the first half where they were really teetering on the edge.
But was it down, Andy, to, like, Kerry's defence for me was absolutely phenomenal. Now, I was reflecting on this today. Like, I really fancied Mayo against Dublin. I thought, I wasn't sure what to make of Dublin. And when you think you get to this stage where three people can call two games so badly wrong, where did this Kerry performance come from?
Yeah, Johnny, I think, look, Kerry are always Kerry, okay? So they have that ability. They're not all Ireland champions for no reason. I just don't think they weren't showing a serious amount of intensity. I think they were being a little bit passive. I thought, when they played Mayo, obviously in Fitzgerald Stadium, Mayo had an ability where they pulled Morley left and right, and they left big gaps down that centre channel. I think the major flaw that Tyrone fell into was Tyrone didn't change it up. I thought McShane probably should have started. I think they needed a fulcrum. They needed a centre point. They needed someone right in on that full forward line to cause Morley to turn around and have to go back towards his goal. So that seems like a very small thing, but it's actually a big thing, because what can happen is you can put a hand pass in over his head, force him to turn around, and then you can feed runners like the Canavan young lads coming in left and right, who've got that skill, ability, agility and speed to be able to move out away and get scores. But what happened was Kerry just filled the middle. They just filled the D. And Tyrone continuously tried to come around the corners. They brought every single attack down the centre. They had very, very little width. Very few scores from them came from outside, kind of left and right of the D. And ultimately, they were just nabbed every time, turned over, and of course that gave Kerry fuel, and it gave them much more energy. And I think, Johnny, honestly, they looked completely leggy to me. And I'm not just saying that tiredness is an excuse. I think Kerry were by far the better team. But there's a point. I think there's a shot where McCurry has a free, and he has just missed one. And I think it's about 9-7. And absolutely no one is showing for him. You can see him. He doesn't necessarily want to kick it. He's saying to himself, I've already missed one. The breeze is swirling around. This is a long kick for me. And you can see he's toe tapping and he's looking for someone to show. And the camera kind of zoomed out, and absolutely no Tyrone player was making an effort for him. Now that just says, again, it's a small thing, but it just kind of gives you a little kind of insight into how they were feeling, their energy, their I suppose their body language, and I think they resigned themselves to that very, very quickly. Now on the flip side, Kerry were fantastic. I think Kerry brought Kerry brought what they needed to bring. Kerry did the bullying last week, and everyone expected that Tyrone would do it. Well, Kerry did it, and a number of the Kerry lads who were questioned, like O'Connor and even probably Paddy Clifford a little bit. There was loads of lads getting into Tyrone faces. They were bringing the fight to Tyrone, and they were saying to them, "Listen, we're not going back today." So that's a good thing to see from a Kerry perspective, because then they can mix both. And I thought Morley was fantastic. Morley is a really, really class player, very intelligent fella on the pitch, and you can just see how he organises things. And as I say, Tyrone fell into the trap of not trying to get him out of there, and they paid the price for that.
There was the accuracy from Seanie O'Shea as well. Did he kick 1-5 possibly in the game overall? Like, finished that goal at the end of that unbelievable David Clifford over the shoulder sideline pass. I don't know how he did it. I'm
going to just put this forward, right? I think the David Clifford thing is at once kind of, it's part genius and it's part complete pot luck, because David Clifford, I don't know if you listen, Anthony, he sums this up so brilliantly after the game. He's like, there are two lads going to absolutely barrel me over the sideline. I literally had one option, kick it before it goes out. And he has that bit of awareness. Now, I think only David Clifford could actually do this, but at the same time I'm thinking it was kind of one of these things that looked almost better than it was, and the frightening thing is he was on the periphery of the game. Like, he wasn't even, he just kind of half turned up. He didn't need to.
Yeah, well, he was when I saw the pass going down to him from, I think Paddy kicks it to him, I was like, oh Jesus.
Hospital pass,
because I think Hansy and there was definitely two of them there coming for him. And like, there was nowhere else to go bar he was getting murdered. So if he had caught the ball, he would have been absolutely crucified. There's no doubt about it. And those two lads would have taken their opportunity, which was rightly so. But yeah, the skill was. But still, Johnny, it's. If I tried to do something like that, I'd probably end up in row C in the Hogan, because I'd trip over myself and nearly kill myself, whereas he still has the dexterity and the ability to do it. And as you say, the awareness to know. He probably just had a quick look behind him.
Well, I was thinking, Anthony, like, I know he was supposed to be very good at soccer, like, when he was younger, and the first thing that came into my head when I saw that was, Jesus, that's like a pass you'd play in midfield in soccer. Like, it was that good. It was a complete soccer pass, like.
Yeah. And look, he's an amazing player, and of course, and we spoke about this last year, Shane. And not that the Kerry lads will remember this when we were lauding Kerry, but what he has become is he's become a man mountain. Like, he himself and O'Shea, you don't bully those lads too easy now. 2 or 3 years ago, when they were only starting out, I remember Dublin played them, and Tyrone, you could kind of give it to them and hope to try to get into their head. There's none of that now. Like, these lads have grown up, they're mature, they're well able to mix it for you. They'll give it to you as well. And I know I'm talking about, but that does matter in quarterfinals and semi-finals. It's an attitudinal thing as much as anything else. It's what you're willing to bring to the party, the skill and all those different things. But it's that intensity, it's that willingness to go down on balls where you probably shouldn't go down, 50-50s or 60-40s against you. And Kerry brought that, and I think Tyrone were slightly, I wouldn't say shocked by it, but I think it's amazing. Even though it was close enough in the first half on the scoreboard, I think if you actually go back and analyse that first half, you'd say Tyrone got some pretty good individual scores, whereas Kerry were literally just toying with them a little bit. And you know what? I remember I sent a message out. I just said this could end up a hiding here if Tyrone don't get the finger out, and it could have been even worse for them.
The tally situation that you mentioned, like he's obviously a great reputation, but I don't know, Anthony, are you slightly downplaying how 99 out of 100 this Kerry defensive performance was?
Look, I don't like the thing, Johnny, is I know I'm stuttering here, but Gavin White, unbelievable player. Like, I think he's been hampered a bit by injury early on the season. So that's the first time I've seen him this year where he was getting back to his best of last year. O'Sullivan, if you look what they did as well, and the management have to get a lot of credit for this. They picked certain Tyrone fellas out and they said, I tell you what we're going to do, we're not going to let these lads dictate to us. So Matty Donnelly is usually a bit of a quarterback for Tyrone. He usually likes to sit in the pocket behind midfield and spray balls left and right. Matty Donnelly spent, I'd say, whatever amount of time he was on the pitch, I think he was hauled off about 55 or 60 minutes, but he spent that 60 minutes chasing O'Sullivan back towards his own goal. So all he was doing was running back. If you watch McCurry, the amount of times McCurry ended up sprinting back towards his own goal, So what that does is it says, listen, we're going to take you all the way down here, and you're going to have to come all the way back up to get a score. So the Kerry full back line and half back line deserve a massive amount of credit, because not only, Johnny, it's very, very difficult. You know when you're set in that defensive position, and how energy sapping it can be to be moving across left, right, covering off runs, everything else, to then be able to go and be able to support a player as soon as you get the ball. That's a difficult thing to do, and it's a very, very energy sapping thing to do. And then to have the wherewithal when you get up there to kick scores as they did, that I thought. So not only from a defensive point of view were they excellent, but from an offensive point of view, that when they turned the ball over, by Jesus, they got up in support. And ultimately, I know we'll talk about Monaghan and we'll talk about Mayo, but that is where the modern game is at the moment. It's the ability of those defenders to join the attack at speed and add all the plus ones, because your forwards are generally looked after up top, but these guys actually bring the extra width and the extra kind of vigour in attack.
Yeah, and I think we'd rightly pointed out that Kennedy and Kilpatrick were two of the best midfielders in the country, and certainly one of, if not the best, midfield partnerships in the country. So I guess the expectation was that they would dominate that midfield, and we should say that Diarmuid O'Connor and Jack Barry were both supreme. So that's one area of the pitch, I guess, Anthony, that we weren't expecting Kerry to dominate, but they did.
Well, Shane, there was question marks over them, and I think rightly so. Like, I think if you sat down Diarmuid O'Connor and Barry and said to them, how, pre the game, how's your season going? I don't think they'd be very, very happy with it. You can only analyse what's in front of you. You can say, oh, I wish and blah blah blah, maybe, but like if you're going on quality, what you've seen in the last number of matches, that's where they were. The midfield was poor. They were lacking intensity. They were lacking aggression. They weren't really joining the attack very, very well. They seemed slow and dithering on the ball. But like I worried for them a bit against Kennedy and Kilpatrick, because those two guys were bringing a massive amount of energy into it, switching between full forward and midfield, joining the attack well. But they just cleaned them out. They cleaned them out, absolutely. And I felt sorry for, like, Tyrone were doing a lot of these. If you look at the previous game against Donegal, where they would come into the line, as an attacking force, there was 3 or 4 options always off the shoulder. They were coming at different angles. Whereas last weekend, it was always just one player coming out of an angle. And of course, Tyrone had set the trap and just bang, they were turning the ball over repeatedly, as I said already. Those two guys were brilliant, really, really good. The big question for them is, though, will they be able to repeat it? Because the next challenge, that midfield isn't too handy either now.
Yeah, Conor Glass and Brendan Rodgers up next for the Kerry lads. So they've probably had that Kerry midfield that will have to have played the 2 best midfield pairings in the country in 2 games in a row in the Tyrone and Derry midfield partnership. So that'll be a fascinating one.
It's just Derry are going to just approach the game so differently. Yeah, because I mean,
you think so?
There has to be a little bit of, you have to be a little bit frightened looking at that Kerry performance, considering like Clifford was in for a goal that was sort of pulled back for a free when the advantage could have been played. Nearly scored a goal at the end. So even though he was on the periphery, I thought he still was excellent. If you're Derry, what do you do? Like, I mean, and Derry are a really, really well coached team, I think, Andy.
Well, if you look at their game, and I know I heard you boys chatting, like, the one thing you would talk about that game, if you're just trying to sum it up in one word against Cork, was control. So Derry control you. What they essentially do is they are one of the best teams that as soon as they've wanted, it's like having a balloon. They can take air out of the balloon when they want, and then they can pump the air back in when they choose to. And they can burst it if they want as well. So, if you watch the game and you watch the ebb and flow, and I know people were giving out, but that they don't care whether supporters like what they're doing or not. Like, I mean, they're there to win games, and they're there to win the All Ireland. And what they do is they control the game continuously from minute 1 to minute 70 odd. And their whole idea is that if you get a run on us, we'll just take control back of the game. They very rarely get into an arm wrestle. Very rarely. It's usually done on their terms. Now, there will come a point in that Kerry game, absolutely, I think 100%, where Kerry need to bring that bit of anarchy into it. Where Kerry need to bring that bit of where Derry are slightly losing their head. I can't remember who it was in one Ulster Championship match this year, but there was a sense of that. You come back to me. But you need to bring them out of that comfort zone where they're all kind of, taking their time, tipping the ball around, choosing the runners, they're doing their set plays, all that stuff. You need to get them out of that. And that, I think, really is the only way to beat them. Now, how do you do that? Well, I think what you do is you certainly repeat what you had previously, as in this week, from a Kerry perspective. So you bring that intensity, you bring that tackling, you bring all of that. But I think you nearly have to bring the game to them. You have to squeeze up on Derry, and you have to force Derry out of that comfort zone, as I said. If you give them the ball and let them dictate and try to counter-attack them, they're well used to that. So I think you really have to change things around again, and it's going to be a fascinating game, by the way, because Derry. For me, I know people were saying, "Oh, Cork were well in that game," and they were, and I think Cork have improved massively. But I never ever worried that Derry were going to lose that game. Even when they got the goal, I was thinking Derry would come down the field here. They'll just strangle this game and they get a point or two. Now, ultimately, they got a goal straight away, but they could have got a one or two more. So Derry are in good stead, and I know we can talk about it more maybe when we're previewing the game. But it's about trying to get them, Johnny. I think it's trying to get them where their head is a little bit fried. You can't have them thinking that it's nice and easy. I'm not saying it's easy, but they look so in control that it looks like they're just kind of going through their patterns, where you need to try to shake them out of that. I think.
Yeah, I'd be astonished if Derry beat. I'd be astonished if they won that game, because if you look at Cork did get in for
3-point swing with the bookies.
I mean, I'm just thinking already in my head, I think that's a great bet. But right. It's look, if you look at Cork actually got in for half goal chances in the first half as well. They did get a goal. They sort of nearly had another goal chance. Kerry are miles better than Cork. And as Kerry's defending yesterday, Shane, is I'd be amazed now, and I'm no expert, but what I saw this weekend, Kerry are miles better than Anthony Bar Dublin at the moment on that display.
Possibly.
Well, I think the big thing, Shane. I think the big thing, Johnny. I don't. There's a reason why Derry have to do what they have to do, right? And the reason is that they don't have the forward prowess Kerry have. Okay, so they have to control it. They have to control it. They have to get McGuigan and certain lads, Doherty and certain lads onto the ball, Rodgers at certain times, and provide them the platform to get the scores. The Brendan Rodgers, you can nearly, as soon as he gets the ball, if someone said to you weren't watching, you'd say, yeah, he's getting it in a central channel, he's going to dip his shoulder left, he's going to bounce past the player, and he's going to clip it over his right foot. How many of those scores has he got? They're designed because when they after a long period of time when they have the ball, they isolate him in the middle of the pitch, generally against another midfielder. That doesn't happen just by chance. So Kerry will have, obviously, I think, the better forwards, and I think Derry will over rely on one or two. And if Kerry have the defenders, which they have, to pick off the McGuigans and a couple of others, I think it'll be a Kerry win in that frame. Now, the only thing I would argue against is if Derry can pull Morley left and right, because Derry do play with a lot of width, and if they can get Morley out of that centre half back position and pull him left and right, a la Mayo in that game, well, then they could find some ability straight down the middle and some openings where they can come tearing down the middle, which they did against Cork as well. So look, I don't think it'll be all Kerry. Derry are there on merit. And they've got a decent backline themselves, so I think it's going to be a cracking game too.
Yeah, 100% agree with you. I'm probably biased in saying Monaghan are one of the stories of the championship so far, but if you think back to even Ryan O'Toole's last minute goal against Tyrone in the Ulster Championship, and then the even drawing with Derry in the group, beating Clare, the last minute antics against Kildare, the way in which the game was played at the weekend. And Anthony, I guess they have a big task against Dublin in the semi-final, but looking at the weekend, I mean, the way Armagh set up, and I know it was a tight game and it could have gone either way in the end on a shootout, but it was methodical. It was a slow down approach which suits Monaghan down to a T. And it was almost like Armagh were maybe too negative, and Monaghan were probably licking their lips at the way Armagh had set up.
Yeah, we probably don't have time to talk about Monaghan though, do we?
No, go on, we'll give you an extra half an hour here, go on.
Do you know what? I played against Vinnie Curry, and the one thing I've noticed and the one thing I realised, well, there was plenty of fellas in that Monaghan team we used to battle against a lot because we used to meet them in league and championship. But Vinnie was a fella who would literally be dragged off the pitch with the boots on. He would never go back, right? He would never ever know when it was done. And teams, quite often, the best teams, are formed in the image of the management and the manager. And what they'll do is they will take on the attributes and the values and all those different things of the manager. And I see that in Monaghan absolutely with this thing. They are resilient to the end. They have no lack of cojones. Like, I mean, Jesus, some of the stuff they did. McManus again, like, I mean, you start to run out of superlatives. His first touch, I think we said it. I remember a couple of weeks ago he played in summer game, but his first touch, he gets fouled and he sticks that free. Are you kidding me? Where it was, he never even thinks. And by the way, you're talking about he's not looking to go short ever. He's thinking, this is a score for me. His score at the end, obviously, to level it, Grugan will be having absolute nightmares because I don't think he needed to foul him, even put a hand near him. And Rory had a great game himself, but he just panicked, and he panicked when he saw McManus. And McManus makes you do that kind of stuff, But I think they were absolutely fantastic, Shane. I think, and I think Armagh, in the cold light of day, they will be absolutely kicking themselves again. They had 3 chances in that extra time, and extra time is all about those first 3 or 4 minutes of that first set of extra time. It's about, if you can get a couple of scores ahead, well, then you can kind of control it and see it out. And they were a point up, and they had 3 chances to go 2, 3, 4 up, and even if they've gotten 2 of those, and what had happened was they brought on a couple of subs, a few subs got the ball, and they rushed and they took the wrong option and they went for scores instead of trying to get it to the scorers, which they did with Rian O'Neill to get obviously the one just before McManus's equaliser. They needed to just be able to control it and calm that. But you know what, Monaghan stayed in it. And they brought it into penalties, and then of course it was just who was going to take it. But they are, getting back into the game. I thought McCarthy is playing
all-star guaranteed, isn't it?
He is absolutely but again, it goes back to what we were saying, Johnny, about this. Your 5 and your 7 are so important. Carl O'Connell and him are so important for that Mayo team. They bring absolutely everything to that Mayo team. And what happens is Monaghan team. From a defensive point of view, what happens is you're squared off against your forwards and everything else, and you're trying to close off the space. And next thing, this guy comes out of nowhere where there is space at pace, and he gets slipped the ball and he steps inside, and it's very, very difficult to mark because you now have to rush out towards him, because if you leave him, he's just going to stick it over the bar, which they do. So it causes mayhem. And Monaghan have really done that. If you think of McCarthy at the start of the championship, I think he started 11 in one of the games, and he went straight back in half back. I think that was one of the first rounds, Shane, and then they were being well bet, and he went back in half back and it just turned the game around. So Corey, there's no lack of leadership there, and there's no lack of smarts on the sideline as well. I know Michael Brannigan is on the sideline. Gabriel's on the side. So they've a smart setup and they're doing very well. And you know what? They're there on merit. And Armagh, people would say that Armagh have been cautious all year, that they didn't really, push back the shoulders and go for it. And I think ultimately that caught them. I think ultimately it caught them. They might say, listen, we want to control games, a bit like Derry as well. But I think Armagh have a bit more in the forward line, that they need to be able to do these crossfield balls more, that we saw a bit of. And they got some great scores. But then at times you're saying, Jesus, go for it. Go more for it. And I think McGeaney will be sick, and I know he was given out about the referee and the timekeeping and all that, but that's for another day. I thought it was listen, I saw people giving out about the game. I thought it was an absolutely fascinating game, and I thought
that's probably the perfect word for it. Fascinating for sure. Vinny Coy was my leaving cert economics teacher, so we'll have to. I know all about his leadership. We'll get him in studio after the final, of course, after Monaghan win the final. Maybe I'm being too optimistic there, but listen, Anthony, we didn't get touching on the Dubs. We'll talk to Dubs maybe next week, previewing that semi-final against Monaghan, and we're going to be talking with Keith Higgins shortly about Mayo. So Anthony, brilliant stuff as always. Thanks a million.
No bother. Cheers, lads.
Stuff. Anthony Moyles on the line there, former Meath star, assessing the weekend's action.